Hello everyone, and welcome to my Brown Fur Transmuter Mercenary Guide for Pathfinder Wrath of the Righteous. I'm your host, Colors Fade. In my top 5 tips for newbies video, I mentioned that this is one of the best things new players can do for their party is to hire a Brown Fur Transmuter as a mercenary. This is a subclass of the Arcanist archetype, which possesses a unique ability called Powerful Change. Brown Fur Transmuters receive this ability at level 3, and what it does is allow them to boost the bonuses granted by certain transmutation spells, such as Bull's Strength and Cat's Grace, causing them to bestow a +6 bonus instead of the normal +4. This also works with size-altering spells like Enlarge or Reduce Person. So when you put these two spells together, they can make a significant difference for your party throughout the entire life of the game, but especially in the first half. Unfortunately, there are no companions with this class, so you're forced to either spec someone like Nenio into this role or roll up a mercenary. And I think rolling a mercenary is by far the better way to go, because if you try to spec someone like Nenio into this class, you're going to delay your ability to use Powerful Change by an additional 3 levels, meaning the earliest you can use it in your party would be level 6. And frankly, Powerful Change is such a strong ability that I think you should have it as early as possible. The soonest you can roll a mercenary is level 3, in Act 1, after you reach the Defender's Heart. Talk to Hylor standing near Irabeth and he'll set you up. It's a good idea to do this as soon as possible because the cost of hiring a mercenary is not cheap and it becomes considerably more expensive as the game progresses. Now, in my opinion, the Powerful Change ability is enough of a reason all by itself to warrant hiring a mercenary as a Brown Fur Transmuter. However, I prefer my companions also be able to deal damage, and that is not something that a squishy caster class typically does very well. This problem is compounded for the Brown Fur Transmuter because they are mostly a buffing class, so the vast majority of their spell slots are allocated for buffs, and that doesn't leave them a lot of spell power for dealing damage. Thus, we have to come up with another way for them to be effective in combat. Since they are a squishy caster class, we'd like to keep them at range. The problem is there aren't a lot of ranged weapons made of cold iron, especially in the early game. And if you can't bypass the damage reduction of demons, then your ranged shots will be useless. And when you do find good bows, you're going to give them to Lan and Arushale anyway. There is, however, a way to make our Brown Fur Transmuter a very effective ranged damage dealer, and that is by switching from a bow to throwing axes. Now, I have experimented with a bunch of different builds for a Brown Fur Transmuter Mercenary. There are a whole lot of different ways that you can try to make them offensively capable and contribute to the group DPS. One way is you can give them a reach weapon like a Bardiche, and there is a really cool Bardiche in the game that's intelligence based that will allow them to apply their intelligence modifier instead of their strength modifier for damage and attack rolls. I prefer to give that weapon to Nenio and have Nenio use it because I have a very specific Eldritch Knight build for Nenio, and so I don't like to do it that way. I have also set this character up as an Eldritch Knight dual-wielding Kukris because they have such good crit range, and that does work, but the problem is they are in the thick of melee to do that, and I don't really want them there. Another really effective way that I have used this character is to have them mount Bismuth, the Triceratops pet that you get, because he can be buffed to the gills and get a really high AC. And if you use something like a dueling sword, which you can get through a character background selection at character startup, they can have a really nice crit range and can do a lot of damage. But what I'd really prefer is for them to stand at range and do a massive amount of damage. This, to me, is the best class combination for this character. It gives you all the buffs that you want, and then it's really effective at ranged combat. So without further ado, let's get into the build. I'm going to start with this custom portrait I have of a female tiefling with bismuth in the background, and that's because we are going to be playing a tiefling since they do have really good stat distribution for this class, and we will be mounting bismuth because, as mentioned earlier, you can buff him and give him really high AC, and for the first 2/3 of the game, that's really effective. By the time you move into Act 4, enemies are going to start to target you with spells and spell-like abilities that hit your will saves and fortitude saves, and unfortunately for Bismuth, he has a really low will save, so you are going to have to buff him with spell resistance to help him as much as possible make those saves, otherwise he will become more of a liability than an asset. So we're going to start with this character and we're going to grab the Arcanist Brown Fur Transmuter class. And the first thing we're going to do is pick our Arcanist exploits. Now we're only going to be taking 2 of these and we're not going to be using either one of them. So it really doesn't matter what you take here because you're going to be spending all of your Arcanist exploit power on buffing characters. What we're going to do here is take Potent Magic because if you are going to expend a point from your Arcane Reservoir, you're going to want to do it early in the game around level 3, 4, 5, and 6 to use on Grease to make sure enemies fall down. It's very effective when you're running around Canabras and Dresden and some other places. So if you want to save an Arcane point for that, it's very useful. We're going to play a Tiefling, and we're going to use the Tiefling default class down here at the bottom. They get a +2 racial bonus to Dexterity and Intelligence, and they take a penalty to Charisma, which we don't care about. Important down here, we're going to take Street Urchin and Pickpocket, and the reason for this is because it's going to add Trickery and Stealth to their list of class skills. This is a character who's never going to leave our party. They're a mercenary, and we're hiring them to do a job, and they're going to do it for the lifetime of the game, so they might as well do something else that's useful for the party. Trickery is always useful and stealth is useful when you're traveling the map. So we're going to add those 2 class abilities. Now for setting up our points, what we're going to want to do is 18 for Int and 18 for Dex, and then we're going to dump Charisma and add 2 more points to Strength and 2 more points to Con. The Strength is going to be so we have a little bit more damage, and the Con is going to be for saves. You could take this off the Strength and put it in Wisdom if you're worried about saves. It's however you want to spend these last couple of points. The important thing is to have 18 Dex and 18 Int. We're going to get to bump those up 5 different times, and that's the perfect number. You'll see it as we go. We're going to grab Trickery, Stealth, Knowledge Arcana, and Knowledge World because these work off Intelligence, and then move on. So at level 1, what we want to take is down here. Martial Weapons Proficiency. It's the only feat we need to become an Eldritch Knight because of the way our class is aligned. We're going to need this anyway to use the weapons that we want to use. So we're going to grab that, and then for spells at level 1, I recommend you want Enlarge Person and Reduce Person for sure. Expeditious Retreat is pretty good. You definitely want Grease. You probably want Hurricane Blow because you're going to be using a bow early in the game. You want Mage Armor, Reduce Person, Shield. If you don't want to take Expeditious Retreat until later, grab Magic Missile. I'll help you finish off a couple of enemies. I'm going to choose Desna, and I'm going to give my character some hair, dump their helmet, and we'll move on. Level 1 Brown Fur Transmuter. Now at level 2, it's an easy level. We just up our skills. Pick up any spells that you want that you don't already have, but remember you're only going to get a few spell slots for memorizations, and then you're going to be able to use those spells as many times as you want to. So you're not really going to be using all of these spells. I like to grab Shocking Grasp, Expeditious Retreat, Ray of Enfeeblement, and Snowball as we go. But for the most part, the ones you're going to be memorizing and keep memorizing are Enlarge Person, Reduce Person, probably Mage Armor, Shield, and maybe Magic Missile. Oh, Grease. So my first 4, you'll see those when we get to the spellbook. You're going to have a whole bunch of spells here that you just never end up using, and you can also still learn spells from scrolls. Brown Fur Transmuter, level 3. We're going to grab this and Point Blank Shot, which gives us the +1 bonus to attack and damage rolls with ranged weapons that ranges up to 30 feet. This will be good for the lifetime of our class. More spells that you're not going to use. You can grab this because it provides a penalty to Strength equal to 1d6 +1 per 2 caster levels, and a Fortitude save only reduces the penalty by half. It doesn't negate it. And Snowball is a nice touch spell if you need to do some damage against touch AC characters, but again, you're not going to have it memorized and you're not going to use it, so it doesn't matter. Level 4, we're going to put our first 2 points into Intelligence. So that's the first of our 2 points. Then we're going to come up here, and at level 4, we finally get the first of our buff spells that are important. Bull Strength, Cat's Grace. Grab both of those. We're going to be using Powerful Change on both of them. At level 5, I like to grab Dimensional Slide. If I'm saving an Arcanist point, this can get me out of trouble or it can move me somewhere advantageous. But other than that, if you want to take Swift Consume, do it, but you're not going to be using it probably. Everything else, most of these require Charisma modifiers, and we don't have any Charisma. So again, you're not really going to be using any of these anyways. So I would just say Dimensional Slide and move on. We don't care about the Arcanist exploits with this build. At level 5, we want to take Precise Shot. This is going to reduce the penalty of -4 that we take for shooting into a melee scrum. Again, it'll be good for the life of our build. We want to take Bear's Endurance here, and then down here, we want to take Owl's Wisdom. Now, later on, you'll want to take Mirror Image probably to make yourself a little more survivable, and you may want to add something else like Glitter Dust, but I generally think that Ember is going to be fine handling the Glitter Dust end of things. This gets us level 6 Brown Fur Transmuter. We just add a bunch of points here. And now we pick up our first of our next level spells. We want to grab Displacement and Haste right off the bat. Displacement for whoever our main tank is and Haste for everybody else. And now at level 7 we can start taking levels in Eldritch Knight. This is going to give us our base attack bonus of a fighter, and we're still going to be allowed to have spells per day after the first level of Eldritch Knight. So on this level of Eldritch Knight, the very first one, we're not going to get any new spells, but we are going to get a feat, and at level 7 we're going to take 2 of them. We're going to get Outflank, and this is really important. Even though we are a ranged user, you want this. And here's why. Not because of the first part of the text. Whenever you and an ally who also has this feat are flanking the same creature, you're not flanking, you're at range. It's the second part of this that's important. In addition, whenever you score a critical hit against a flanked creature, it provokes an attack of opportunity from your ally. So if you have a bunch of your melees standing around an enemy and you hit it with a crit with a ranged weapon, it causes all of them to take a swing. You want this on all your ranged characters. In addition to that, we're going to take weapon focus, and this is where it starts to come into view now what we're doing down here. The throwing axe. It's a slashing weapon. Throwing axes are incredible. Wenduwog with her throwing axes is an absolute menace, but here we get to have a throwing axe dual wielding character that's actually beneficial outside of just doing damage because they're going to buff our party to the gills. So we grab that. Now all we do is take Eldritch Knight as far as we can. We're going to throw another point into our intelligence. Then we're going to take this. Now at this point in time, since you're an Eldritch Knight, you have more skills that you can take. I recommend just putting everything else into perception, because the more characters you have with perception as a skill, the more likely you are to unearth some of those hard to find things. We're going to get an Arcanist. That's our base class, so now we can start getting new spells from that again. And here we are, level 3 spells. I recommend taking Heroism, even though we're not going to be using it a lot, and then Resist Energy Communal. Now you could take, at level 8, this is a decent level to do it, you could take Protection from Arrows Communal, because, believe it or not, this protects you from the Vrock Screech. But I'm just going to grab Resist Energy Communal and Heroism because I prefer to have a couple more people with Heroism so we don't tap Ember out of all of her spells, because Ember will also get it. Now, at level 9, what we're going to take is 2-weapon fighting so that we can wield both of the axes. Now, at this point in time, we still don't have the axes that we want to have, but we're going to get them, and they're going to be awesome. And then at this level, I would take Greater Invisibility and Animate Undead. Greater Invisibility is going to give you functions like invisibility. Your characters are going to get actually improved to hit with it. That's the one part of it. For the longest time, I didn't understand what the benefits of having Greater Invisibility is, and it's because it's going to add to your attack bonus. And then Animate Dead is great because there are so many points in time in the game when you are fighting super dangerous enemies and you just want to keep a steady stock of minions around them so that when it's their turn to attack, they're attacking those things and not your party. And that gives your party a chance to clear some enemies and then finally go in and attack the boss. This works for a boss in Winter Sun. This works really well for Playful Darkness. You want to have a couple of people who can conjure, preferably more than a couple, preferably like 4. Conjuring is really powerful in the game as a tactic, not so much because the conjurations themselves are powerful. At level 10, we're going to get these spells. I would pick Dimension Door because there's a couple of points in time at the game that are coming up around level 13 where you're really going to want this spell for your whole party. Remember, we have Dimensional Slide that we can use an Arcanist point on, but it's a wasted point. I'd rather use that point for buffing, and it doesn't allow us to do the whole party. So I would grab Dimension Door here and then Protection from Energy Communal, so we have another protection from all the bad things that are going to happen to us. We're going to get Eldritch Knight 5 here. Keep poking points in to all of our skills. And so at level 11, we're going to take Double Slice so that we can add our strength bonus to damage rolls in our offhand, because we are going to be buffing our strength as much as possible for damage. And then we're going to take Weapon Specialization and Throwing Axes for more damage even. And then for spells at level 11, what I would recommend is Stone Skin Communal and Animal Growth. We're going to have pets in this build, in this class, in this party. I'm going to have about 3 different pets, and this gives them a huge bonus. They get a +8 bonus to strength and a +4 size bonus to constitution. It makes them really effective at doing things like hitting enemies and tripping them, etc., etc., etc. They get bonuses to AC, natural AC. It's just fantastic to have if you got pets. At Eldritch Knight 6, we're finally going to put a point in dexterity. We need 19 points in dexterity to get greater 2-weapon fighting, and that's coming up. So we might as well just put it in right there. Now, at level 12 for spells, what I want to take is down here, Genie Kind, and then I'm going to scroll all the way down here, and I'm going to grab Mirror Image. Again, if you have scrolls, you can learn these already. You may have a bunch of mirror images in your inventory, so learn it that way and take a different spell on level up. I'm all for doing that. It's cool that the Arcanist can do it, so definitely do that. In fact, I would advise you, if you've got scrolls that you can memorize, just do it before you level up, and then at level up, pick whatever's left. At level 13, we're going to get improved 2-weapon fighting. And then for spells, these are huge. We get Mass Bull Strength and Mass Cat's Greats, and your Powerful Change ability works on this, so you can hit everybody in the group at one time with it and get a +6. Level 8 of Eldritch Knight. We come in here with level 14. We're going to grab Bear's Mass and Owl's Mass. These are, again, those are really useful for helping with saving throws, and there are a bunch of enemies who are going to want to hit you with things that affect those 2 saves, Fortitude and Willpower. So you're going to want to be buffed for them, and she'll be able to buff everybody in the party with Powerful Change on those. At level 15, we want to grab Greater Weapon Focus on our throwing axes, so it's easier for us to hit. And then we want to go down here and grab Greater 2-Weapon Fighting. And then for spells, Legendary Proportions and Icy Body. This gives you some really good defense. Legendary Proportions makes people huge, but you do need Dinosaur Bones. It's going to give you size bonus to Strength, Constitution, damage reduction to Adamantine. It's awesome. You can cast that on anybody you want to, including yourself. This is our last level of Eldritch Knight. We're going to put our last 2 points here into Intelligence. Then we're going to come up here and grab Firebrand and Circle of Clarity. Circle of Clarities, put that on the ground. Don't cast it on someone and allow their spell resistance to negate it. Just cast it on the ground, create a big circle, and try to help you with concealment and perception checks. Now we're done. We no longer need to take any more Eldritch Knight classes. We can no longer take any more Eldritch Knight levels. You could go back in here and keep taking Brown Fur Transmuter stuff, and at level 9 of Brown Fur Transmuter, you get the ability to spend a point of your Arcane Reservoir to change any transmutation spell in a range of personal to a range of touch. I don't think that's worth it. What I would much rather do is spec into a Mutation Warrior. This is going to give us a few more feats to allow us to round out our character in these later levels, and it's also going to give us a mutation for our dexterity, so it's another +4 to our dexterity, which is going to help us be even better at throwing those axes. Slide on in here, take all this stuff, add it in there, and then for this first level of Mutation Warrior, we're going to grab Improved Critical with the throwing axes. This is the only bad thing about the throwing axes is their critical range is 20, and that's it. So the best you can do is extend it to 19 to 20, which is really sad. We get Improved Critical for that, and then we get Improved Precise Shot. This is going to give us a couple more bonuses. So your ranged attacks ignore anything but total concealment. This is basically the ranged version of Blind Fight, and we like having that. And then Mutation Warrior number 2. So at this level, at 18, what we're going to get is Greater Weapon Specialization in our throwing axes. More bonuses to damage. Now, at this level, we finally get in our Mutation Warrior Bravery, we're going to get our mutation right here at level 3 of this class. Fighter Mutation Warrior. We can now use our mutation. at level 19, and we're going to grab critical focus. You could take some other things up here if you want. We're going to take deadly aim next level. I'd rather have critical focus just to help make it a little bit easier to confirm those rare crits that we're going to get. And then at this level, at level 20, our last level of Mutation Warrior, we get our last bonus to intelligence. And then because we got an extra bonus to intelligence, we got a few more points. I just put them in mobility. You shouldn't need them. And then here's where we're going to take deadly aim. This is basically the ranged version of power attack. So if you're paying attention to the AC of enemies and you know you're going to be throwing axes at some enemies with lower AC, click this on, do extra damage, wipe people out faster. Now for mythic ranks, abundant casting at number 1. That's easy. We're going to want all the abundant castings. At this level, you're not going to have access to all these things because we've already leveled up to level 20. What you're going to want to grab is point blank shot. The bonus for attack and damage rolls granted by point blank shot increases by +2. At mythic rank number 3, you're going to take improved abundant casting, more spells. At mythic rank number 4, you're going to take weapon focus mythic on the throwing axe. Bonuses to your attack rolls, makes it easier to hit. At number 5, you're going to get greater abundant casting. That's all the abundant castings. So now you have a bunch of spells. And at number 6, we're going to take flawless attacks. I didn't used to think this was very good, but now that I played the class, I actually think this is really awesome. Suffering only a -4 penalty on your iterative attacks instead of -5 adds up really quick. And it makes it so that like on your 4th and 5th attacks, instead of having really low numbers, they're actually reasonable. So we're going to grab flawless attacks. And then at mythic rank number 7, we're going to grab enduring spells so our buffs last longer. And then up here at mythic 8, we're going to take mythic 2-weapon fighting. So the penalties on attack rolls for fighting with 2 weapons are reduced by 2. So that helps along with our flawless attacks. And then up here, I would go greater enduring spells. The effects of spells on your allies that should last longer than 5 minutes but shorter than 24 hours now last 24 hours. And then for the final thing, weapon specialization mythic, so we get even more bonuses to damage. So how do we play this class? Much like Ember, things are going to change as the game progresses. In the early levels, you won't have a lot of spell slots, and because you're low level, those spells aren't going to last very long. So you want to wait to use them until there's a tough fight. And then what you want to do is buff Sela and any other strength-based damage dealers with spells like Bull, Strength, and Enlarge Person, using powerful change to grant a +2 bonus to each spell. And as mentioned earlier, you also want to use Grease to knock down your enemies and give yourself attacks of opportunity when they attempt to stand up. That said, for the vast majority of the early game, you're basically an additional damage dealer and not a very good one. You won't find any throwing axes until you reach your camp on the march to Dresden and can talk to the quartermaster. But that's okay because we aren't going to have the feats to specialize in them for quite a while anyway, and our money is better spent elsewhere. For now, it's best to just carry a mix of ranged and melee weapons, while trying to equip cold iron weapons when possible, as that's what's needed to bypass the damage reduction on demons. You'll want to favor a crossbow instead of a longbow during the earliest levels, because you won't have any strength to add to the longbow's damage bonus. Once you have enough spell slots to start buffing yourself along with the rest of the fighters in your group, and once those spells can start to last for a while, then it's worth it to switch to a composite longbow, which adds your strength bonus to damage rolls. You'll also want to equip a reach weapon, like a bardiche or a glaive. The reason for this is because most of the ranged weapons in the early game won't have the cold iron descriptor on them, and that's what you need to bypass the damage reduction of demons. Without it, most of your ranged attacks will result in 0 damage, which is a complete waste of a turn. Thus, what I generally do is scout ahead with stealth and then equip the appropriate weapon for the job. If I see human cultists, then I'll just equip the crossbow or the longbow so I can damage them while safely staying at range. But if I see demons, I'll switch to the best reach weapon that I have with the cold iron descriptor on it and try to stay out of harm's way while still contributing to the damage output of my group. Once we reach Dresden, we'll receive another component to this build, Bismuth, the Triceratops. Our Brown Fur Transmuter will never have a super high armor class, but that's okay because we can mount Bismuth and buff him to a much higher armor class. Unfortunately, you can't manually level him up like other pets that you get with other classes, so you can't give him teamwork feats or feats to improve his saves, which will make him less valuable than the other pets in the game. Still, I think it's worth it to use him as a mount for a couple of reasons. First, his high AC will keep ranged attackers and aggressive chargers from hurting us, and with his mobility, we can move ourselves into range and still fire off all of our attacks. That said, as the game progresses, more and more enemies will hit you with spells and abilities that require fortitude and willpower saves, and unfortunately, Bismuth will often fail these, even with a lot of buffs. So while I find him useful for huge chunks of the game, he's definitely a tool you want to continually evaluate, and if you find him not worth the effort, then just stow him in your inventory. As for throwing axes, after you liberate Dresden, you can speak to some of the merchants there and procure some, but the real gems arrive in Act 3 when we visit Wintersun and encounter Merivok. He wields a lethal pair of +3 throwing axes, the best of which is the Frost Embrace, a +3 icy burst throwing axe that has a chance to paralyze an enemy for 2 rounds. This axe in particular is really awesome. With Bismuth as our mount and our throwing axes in hand, our build is now fully complete. We'll use Powerful Change to buff all our key damage dealers, including ourselves, and then we'll use Bismuth to maneuver into range using our 2-weapon fighting feats to fire off a bunch of attacks with our throwing axes. Outflank and critical hits will keep the rest of our fighters involved as well. In general, we're going to act early at the start of every battle because our initiative roll will be high due to our dexterity. This gives us a chance to fire off haste first and then manually move our character to the end of the turn order so they can launch their axes after all the melee characters have gotten close to their targets. This way, if the Brown Fur Transmuter manages to critically hit with any of their axe attacks, Outflank will trigger attacks of opportunity from all the melee characters standing close. So there you have it, my Brown Fur Transmuter build. I hope you find it valuable. If you haven't used a Brown Fur Transmuter yet, I encourage you to do so. Their buffs make a huge difference, and if you build them right, they can contribute in combat quite well. As always, if you found this video helpful, give it a like and leave questions and comments down below. And please consider subscribing to my channel. Until next time, happy gaming, everyone.